I'm at the reassembly phase on project 2013 Audi A5 rear main seal replacement, and I'm only halfway done. But my new rear main seal has arrived, and it's time to go back in the car. So stick around and find out what challenges I face as this 100% certified amateur tries to get Humpty Dumpty back together again. It is time to start the reassembly on this 2013 Audi A5. If you caught my first video, I completed all of the necessary disassembly steps to get this thing ready for its new rear main seal. I just needed to wait for it to arrive. Now, as you can see, this one is falling apart. This probably separated a little bit more than it was when I removed it from the crankshaft, but you can tell that this aftermarket part from 034 Motorsports is much more durable. This one here, you can tell it's just a flap. I believe it is just a Teflon seal that goes on, and I'm surprised it held on this long, quite frankly. Now, this 034 Motorsports one uses more of a traditional old school rear main seal. With a lot more of a sealing surface, it's definitely more robust. So this is going to go back in, and I need to get going on it ASAP because I am using Permatex Ultra Black, and if you read the instructions, it says to apply it onto the part, get it snug down, but then wait an hour to torque it down. So I want to start that process so I can focus on something else while this is getting ready for its torque sequence. So here is the rear of the crankshaft, and off camera I went and I cleaned up all of the factory RTV that was around the surface, and there was also quite a bit of rust on the backside of the crankshaft. So I took some oil and some 3000 grit sandpaper, and I just made sure to get this buttery smooth. It was definitely rough, and the last thing you want to do is have that brand new rear main seal catch on any rough surfaces, maybe create some sort of tear, and heaven forbid I get a leak after doing all of this work. So I'm pretty happy with how it feels right now, and hopefully that new rear main seal will just slide on. So I have the new rear main seal on. These bolts are just basically finger tight right now. Like I said before, the way that this RTV works is get it finger tight and then you wait an hour and then you torque it down. Now these bolts do not require a lot of torque. It's only 9 foot-pounds, but you do have to go in a specific order. That basically just makes sure that it gets evenly tightened down. And I almost forgot this installation plastic cap, and I put it inside the rear main seal first, and then when you slide it on, you just pull this off. And that way you can make sure that that new rear main seal doesn't bind on anything. So now we start the waiting game for an hour, and while I'm waiting, I'm going to tackle another job that actually doesn't have anything to do with this rear main seal. I figured I might as well replace the diverter valve. Now this car isn't throwing any code specifically for a diverter valve, but quite frankly, the car has 120,000 miles on it. This is my son's primary driver, and he did report at one point when he got on it a little bit, it did sound like after he let off the gas pedal, there was a little bit of a flutter. That can mean that there's something wrong with the diverter valve, or what's known as the blow-off valve. Now, I believe the factory diverter valves on these cars, or at least in the 2013 model year, was a diaphragm style. And diaphragms can dry out, crack, and break over time. And I believe Audi did replace them with a new updated piston style. Here you can see that there is a piston that can go back and forth that is triggered by an electrical impulse when you let off the gas. So given that this really wasn't that expensive of a part, I figured why not replace it? And since the car is already up in the air and I already have the belly pans off, do it. Do it. So first I want to focus on showing you exactly where it is. So I'm going to keep my camera here and I'm going to get on my creeper and I'm going to get under the front passenger side of the car. So just so you can get your bearings, here is the charge pipe that goes from the turbo to the intercooler. If I were to come just inside of that and you were to look straight up, there is the diverter valve right there. Here is the plug for it. So I'm going to get going on that and I'll report back when I'm done. Well, it looks like these two are very similar. Must be this car either had the diverter valve replaced or maybe it did come with the updated piston style system. Now, I will say that this one does feel a little bit gritty when pushing it in, where this one is a lot smoother, both when I push it in and out. You can almost kind of hear the difference.
It's a funny squeaky sound.
So it's time to get this new one in and finish up this job. And there it is. The new one is installed. It is a tight space up in here, so I suggest when you're going to reinstall, try to get the two lower bolts in first, get them tightened up, and then you know it's going to be in its right position, and then you can focus on the top. And when you're done, you're going to want to torque it down to 9 Newton meters. I have this little torque wrench here, and if you have at least maybe about a 2-inch extension, that's about the perfect amount with your T30 to get those bolts in and to get them torqued down. And that's it. Was it totally necessary? It might not have been, looking at the old diverter valve and seeing that it was almost identical to the new one. But who knows how old that other one is, and I was already in there and I had already bought the part, so why not install it? All right, so it's been an hour and it is time for me to torque down these bolts. I have my torque wrench set to 9 Newton meters, and I'm going to go in the specified pattern, and then I can move on to the ring gear. I have the dust shield installed as well as the ring gear, and I have all new stretch bolts that I bought from Audi. I went to the dealership and bought these, and they were like $10 a piece. So I highly recommend that you try to find these online somewhere. I will leave a link in the description below with the actual part number for these, because $10 a piece, and there are 8 of them, is a lot to pay for bolts. So now these need to get torqued and then stretched. So the first torque setting is 44 foot-pounds, and I have my other ratchet with my 24 millimeter socket on the crank bolt. So I'm going to use that as a counter as I torque down these bolts, and you want to go in a crisscross pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So I'm going to get that done. Then I need to stretch these another 90. That's a lot of torque. So we'll see how well I do, and I'll report back when I'm done. All right, so now all of these triple square bolts were originally torqued and then stretched to 90 degrees. And it was not easy. So like I said, you have to basically counter hold the crankshaft with a 24 millimeter and then take these to what is already a pretty high torque reading and then stretch them another 90. So I basically had to kind of stick my foot against the tire for leverage to really get it, but I've got them all. So this part of the job is done, and now the real fun begins, and that means the transmission gets put back in place.
It's a piece of cake.
The next day.
All right, it is actually the next night. I was able to get the transmission in, and I'm under a pretty tight deadline to get this car done. I'm actually leaving to go out of the country for a week in a couple of days, so I have to get this car out of here amongst a few other things that I need to get done. So I did a bunch of stuff off of camera, but I'm gonna take you guys underneath and show you some things that kind of caught me by surprise and were a little bit more difficult than what I thought they were going to be. So I'm gonna wanna point them out to you guys in case you wanna embark on this journey, and maybe point out some things that you wanna keep an eye out for. So here we go. There is the transmission bolted up to the engine. So there's 3 bolts underneath here. I think I called it out in my first video, or part 1, that these bolts underneath are 16 millimeter 12 points, and the ones on the sides and top are 18 millimeter. So I have these all down and torqued. These are supposedly stretch bolts, but Audi says that you can reuse them once, and I'm pretty confident this transmission has never been off previously, so I'm good for this use. But if I need to do this again, if I decide to do it again, I'm going to need to replace these bolts both on the bottom and on the top. The ones on the bottom are all pretty easy to get to. Obviously these 3 are right underneath. There are 2 more up here on the side, and the ones on the top are actually pretty accessible from the top. You just have to lean over the motor, and you can get a ratchet with a small extension on there, especially if your ratchet is flexible or has a joint in it. that should make it a lot simpler. So then I was able to get the axles in. So I have all new axle flange bolts. They're fastened with a pretty good amount of torque. So what I did was I did remove the wheels and then stuck a screwdriver in through the brake rotor and put a rag around it. With that screwdriver keeping the wheel from rotating, I was able to get the torque on these bolts. Plus, with the wheel out, I was able to have a lot more room to be able to get an extension in with a triple square and get these tightened down. And I did that for both sides. Now, there's also on the passenger side a heat shield because the exhaust is coming in this direction. And these bolts I was able to access from the top of the car. I was really just able to reach my hand down in there and tighten them down by hand, and I really had no issues getting my 1/2-inch drive socket down in here. I didn't bother torquing. I don't even know if there is a torque spec. I just made sure that they were Guten tight. So now I'm back over on the driver's side of the transmission, and here's where some things kind of trip me up for a little bit. So these lines here go to the transmission cooler in the front. And for the life of me, I thought that this line on the bottom was not seating properly. But I couldn't understand how this thick bracket here was not bent to make this flush like it is on the top one. So I just thought that this was going to have a leak, and I was beside myself. I thought maybe I'm going to have to buy new lines. And it took me about 2.5 hours before I finally found some information. In fact, I found a Facebook post that somebody else had asked the same question because they thought this wasn't right. And some of the video footage I took in part 1 of this series, I was able to find a shot where I saw this, and this is actually how it's supposed to be, believe it or not. There is an O-ring in there that should keep it from leaking, but I can confirm is this is what it's supposed to look like. 2.5 hours I spent just trying to get this right. And it was right the whole time. Here's where the gear shifter connects to the transmission. This was a piece of cake. It's just two 10mm bolts that hold this bracket down, and this is just a ball socket that you just pop in. It's plastic under there, so that was no big deal whatsoever. And then I was able to get the drive shaft connected again. This was super simple, way easier than on my 944 Turbo. I was just able to slide it back down, and then you just reuse this triple square bolt. That was one of the easier things that I had to do. Now, if you look in here, you'll see the flex plate. You don't see any bolts right here, but there are 3 bolts that attach the flex plate to the ring gear. I was able to get those in and tighten down. I was not able to get a torque wrench in here, and one of the videos that I used to help me with this project basically had the same problem. There's just not enough room here to get a torque wrench in. You would basically need a 12-point crow's foot to be able to get a torque wrench onto it, as well as countering on the crankshaft to be able to get that torqued. I got them as tight as they could, and they should be fine. So moving around to the back, you'll see that I have the exhaust connected. That's actually pretty easy, but what was a little bit challenging was getting the drive shaft on. So I said in the first video, this is a little bit different because it's a B8.5, which means it's 2013 to 2016. If it was a 2012 or a B8 or earlier, there would be a normal looking flange here with a guibo, but with this, it's a slip joint that slips over a drive shaft with this rubber dampener here. I did have to replace this clamp that I was able to purchase from the Audi dealer. That was super cheap. And then in the back, I enlisted the help of my son who drives this car to hold this up while I was able to slide the front on and align it with the mark so that it should remain balanced as it was from the factory. I used all new bolts and torqued them down. So these are stretch bolts, so they are brand new. I purchased them from the dealer as well. And then everything else is just basically getting the exhaust back up. That wasn't too difficult. The hardest part is usually getting the hangers off of the rubber mounts. It just slid right in, piece of cake. So I have all the heat shields installed as well as the rear subframe brace here. So all that is left is the main cross brace that basically goes right here underneath the transmission. You do need new bolts for those, and there's a pretty heavy torque setting for those bolts, so I did get brand new ones, but I want to get up top and I'll talk to you about some of the things on the top side of the car, and then I'll try to start this thing up and see how it runs. Back up top side now, and I have the air filter installed, as well as the O2 sensors and all of the plastic in the front. So all that's left is to fire this thing up, run it through the gears, make sure that they all work, get back underneath, check for any leaks, and see if there's any codes. So fingers crossed. To say that I'm nervous would be an understatement. This was a tremendous amount of work. I don't know if it was quite as much as replacing the motor in the 944 Turbo, but this time around I spent a lot more time on my back underneath the car and it was very difficult to film, so my apologies there, but I guess I'm just delaying right now. So it's time to start this up and see what happens. So far, so good. Seems to be idling okay. Let me shut the door. I did have the battery disconnected, so I would imagine that that would have removed any codes, or at least the check engine light from the dash. So I'm going to need to get out the VCDS and just verify if there's any codes or if there's any stored codes and remove those. But as of right now, this is a huge, huge relief. So now I'm going to go through the gears. Turn off the parking brake before I do that. Everything seems to be working all right. Think it's time to get that brace installed underneath, get the belly pans done, and call this job done. Car is done, or at least I hope it is. It seems like it is. I have the chassis brace on the underside installed, all of those brand new bolts torqued down. Those are also torque to yield, so they have to be replaced every time. And it takes quite a bit of oomph while you're laying on your back to try to get those torqued. Might seem like I'm out of breath. It's 11:30 at night, and I am trying to get this car sorted. Everything is done. I'm going to take it on a quick test drive just around the block a few times so that my son can drive this to school tomorrow, and then me and my wife can finally have our daily drivers to ourselves. All right, so the rear main seal on the 2013 Audi A5 is officially finished. In fact, it was finished about 2 weeks ago. You may have seen earlier in this video that I was under a little bit of pressure to get that car done because I was going on a trip out of the country, and it just so happened that I was going to Dubai. That was the last week of February. And yes, my flight home was probably just about the last flight out of Dubai before they put a total flight stoppage. So thankfully, by the grace of God, I was able to get out of Dubai and back home safely. And now I can officially put that rear main seal job to bed. So let me first apologize. This is going to get a little bit wordy, but I think it's important for those of you that really want to decide, is tackling a job like a rear main seal on a more modern car, especially an all-wheel drive car like that A5, something that a 100% certified amateur can really tackle by themselves in their own garage? And the answer is
yes. Yes! Say it again. Yes!
I was able to do it, and if I can do it, you can do it. With this type of job, there was actually very few specialty tools that were needed to be able to get it done. You just have to make sure that you have some 12-point sockets, some Torx, some triple squares, a couple of different sizes of ratchets, some extensions and breaker bars, and quite frankly, in my opinion, you need to be able to get that car up at least 2 feet off the ground. So if you don't have a set of quick jacks like I do, and you need to work with a traditional set of jack stands, then you need to make sure that they can get that car up high enough off the ground so you have enough room to get a transmission jack underneath so that you can remove the transmission, move it back, lower it down without having the underside of that transmission or that engine staring you directly in the face the entire time. So there are a couple of things that I do want to point out. First, there's actually a lot more room than you would expect on that car. Removing all the nuts and bolts was actually a lot easier than I originally thought, especially when compared to this 944 Turbo. I do also want to point out, and you might have noticed in the videos, that that car does not have the factory catalytic converter installed. If it did, you might have a little bit more of an issue accessing some of the things on the passenger side of the car, but because that car has a modified catalytic converter, I had a little bit more access. But even with the catalytic converter, it's still doable. It just makes the job a little bit slower. The exhaust and the drive shaft weren't difficult either. It just adds a little bit more time to the job. And quite honestly, if I did have an extra set of hands the whole time, it would have made it go by a lot quicker, but definitely something that you can do by yourself. Now, separating the transmission from the engine was a little bit nerve-wracking, especially because it was my first time doing it on that car. Now, reinstalling it, that's where the patience really comes in. And my apologies for not getting more video footage on it. It was just very difficult to get a camera underneath there. And remember, I was doing this by myself, so there was really not too many options for me to set the camera up with as much as I had to move around to get that transmission joined back together with the engine. mainly because I had to use a couple of separate jacks to be able to maneuver the engine, maneuver the transmission, to be able to get them to line up perfectly. And with that, I do want to point out, when you disconnect the transmission from the engine on those cars, the engine actually wants to tilt forward, not backwards. So basically, by me having that engine support on the back of the engine actually made it more difficult for me to join the engine to the transmission. So what I did was I removed that support brace, I went underneath and I jacked up the front of the motor so that it would tilt towards the back, and that actually made joining the transmission and the engine a lot simpler. You probably saw me talk about the transmission lines. They will fight you every second of the way. Those transmission lines do not want to move. So if I were to do this job again, I would get them tied up towards the frame or the subframe of the car using whatever I could to get them out of the way, because trying to get that transmission out and trying to get it back in, I was fighting against those lines every single second. I also want to call out the starter. I did not do a good job of showing the starter getting aligned or put back in, or describing it earlier in the video. The most difficult part about that job is there is a rubber seal that attaches to the backside of the motor or right behind the ring gear, and that basically prevents debris from getting into the ring gear next to the starter. I highly recommend getting that piece of rubber installed before you try to get the starter installed. I got the starter installed and I fought for about an hour trying to get that rubber positioned properly. I had to use pry bars, different things to try to maneuver it in place. I even had to modify it a little bit. So if you're going to take on this job, please learn from my mistakes and get that rubber piece installed, then try to align the starter and get it bolted up to the transmission. But at the end of the day, this project proved exactly what I was hoping. That with enough patience, research, persistence, perseverance, all of the above, this is a job that definitely an amateur mechanic can tackle within their own garage, or maybe even in their own driveway. So if you enjoyed this video or it helped you out in any way, I would really appreciate it if you could give this video a like. It would really help me out. Please also consider subscribing if you have not already. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you'll be alerted the next time I drop a video on either that A5 or maybe the next project that is coming soon. So thank you all very much for sticking around while I got through that A5 rear main seal project, and I'll catch you on the next one.